I'll do a quick introduction of Jeff, and I will read it because I will miss things if I do not. But Jeff has spent his career at the intersections of startups and transformative technology. For over a decade, he has taught one of HBS's most popular entrepreneurship courses, Launching Tech Ventures. One of my good friends is a research fellow with him, so I can attest to how transformative it is. And as co-founder of Flybridge Capital, a leading seed VC firm, which we'll talk about, with over $1 billion under management, he and his partners look for AI-forward companies that are going to transform the world. And so, why I was so interested in having this conversation is I spent a lot of my time having conversations like this about how AI will affect all types of human work, from frontline work to construction to white-collar work. But this was the first book I read that talked about how AI and artificial intelligence would affect arguably one of the most transformative types of human work that we can think about, which is entrepreneurship. And so this is why I was really excited to have this conversation. And we'll talk about kind of your main thesis. But one of the big things in this book is, you talk about almost a eureka moment where you realize that AI would change, not just what entrepreneurs build, but literally how entrepreneurs do what they do. And so I want to kind of go back, whether it was as an investor, as an educator, as an operator. What was the moment, if it was a moment, where you realized AI is going to change this thing that we do that is entrepreneurship?
Great question. And first, I also want to thank Larry for inviting me. I was with my sister and brother-in-law last night, and I was reminded that that's how I know Larry, because my brother-in-law worked with Larry at a law firm, I don't know, Larry, 20 years ago, long time ago. And Larry's done great work in our portfolio with his partner, Neil. So thank you. So yeah, Chika, you're right. I have these two hats that I wear, and wearing those two hats, I was seeing this transformative thing occurring. On the one hand, teaching at HBS, working with students who are starting companies and beginning to leverage AI tools in order to accelerate their product market fit journey. And then secondly, as an investor at Flybridge, as a seed stage investor in AI companies, we're exclusively an AI focused fund. I was seeing these incredibly sophisticated AI native entrepreneurs, not only building AI software products, but creating AI native cultures in their companies. And when I saw those two forces together, I began to see the phenomenon I refer to in the book as the rise of the 10X founder. And the idea behind the 10X founder is similar to what many of you know related to the 10X software developer. The 10X developer is not 10% better or 20% better than the average developer. They're 10 times better, 10 times more productive. And everybody who builds companies wants to hire 10X developers. And what I was seeing was this phenomenon of the 10X founder who was leveraging the modern AI tools to build companies completely differently than ever before. And we'll get into what that looks like in a more granular detail. But it was really exciting to me. I began writing cases about those 10X founders. I began obviously investing in many of them, working closely with them, sitting on their boards, and then wrote the book to try to synthesize this idea of these timely tools in combination with the timeless methods of product market fit that we've been teaching at HBS for many decades and that I've been investing behind.
So let's talk about the 10X founder for a second. One of my old bosses was General Stan McChrystal, a retired 4-star who's legendary in the military. And he spends his days now thinking about leadership. What are the attributes of leadership? And so what I want you to do when you think about the 10X founder, as you talk about this to us, is how are they different than, call them a non-10X founder, than a good founder, or an average founder? What are like their habits of mind?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple maybe tangible examples, and then we can step back and talk about frameworks. So I have a founder in our portfolio that is a company called Topline Pro, and the two founders are Shannon Kay and Nick Ornitz. They both dropped out of HBS, which I had nothing to do with, to be clear. I don't want to get in trouble. But they both dropped out of HBS, joined Y Combinator, and we're building this company called Topline Pro, as I said, that is for service professionals. Many of you work with these service professionals in your lives, landscapers, electricians, plumbers, roofers. And they were trying to build a product to support those service professionals who are very busy on the roof or in your home fixing your toilet and don't have time to go back to a desktop computer and set up appointments, handle billing, respond to inquiries. And so they joined Y Combinator right when GPT 3 was coming out from OpenAI. This was before the ChatGPT moment of only 3 years ago. By the way, that's kind of stunning if you think about it. We're about a few weeks away from the 3-year anniversary of ChatGPT. 3 years. That product is being used by 10% of the planet on a weekly basis.
We're going to talk about this.
I mean, this is insane. We've never seen anything like this. And I do want to talk more about this. But back to Top Line Pro. Nick and Shannon decided to re-engineer their entire company as an AI native company because they're servicing blue collar workers, but they're now building this agentic AI framework for blue collar workers to have AI agents that do sales, that do customer service, that do marketing, that do website development, that do billing, that handle back office, et cetera. And they're doing it as AI native founders. Everything they're doing, they think AI first. If this is a problem to be solved, can I engineer an AI agent or recruit an AI agent to solve that problem? If there's one of my managers comes to me and asks for a hire, do I think, could I not hire a human, but could I actually enlist an AI agent to do that work? Or maybe 10 AI agents, or maybe 100 AI agents that orchestrated together could do that work. So back to your question in terms of frameworks, the AI native founders, the 10X founders, they think AI first in terms of problem solving. They themselves use the tools. They are themselves hands-on builders, even as CEOs. And they are driving a culture of AI native experimentation. It's the reason I called this book The Experimentation Machine. Everything that they could possibly do, they think of in the framework of, let's run the experiment, let's make it an AI native experiment, let's see how it goes, and then let's scale it.
So one of the things you talk about in the book is the difference in the speed scale of AI. And for those of you who've been in business school, we think about S-curves. That basically, a week or a month in AI is like 7 years in the real world. And organizations and human beings don't move that fast, generally. So talk about the hard part. So you talk about the re-engineering of an organization to basically be an AI native firm and move at scale. What are the hardest parts that you're seeing your founders run into in terms of reorganize? Because in the end, these are still human beings. Generally, you have some amount of human beings who are there. How do you re-engineer the culture, the structure to meet just the speed scale that AI brings?
It's a great question. You mentioned and name-checked Stanley McChrystal, who is a hero for me as well. I don't know him at all. I've met him once. Does he use AI tools, do you think, today? Does he vibe code on Replit or Lovable, do you think?
It's a great question.
I'm going to guess no.
So I will say he uses it more than you would think a 72-year-old does. But that was, he was brought to that. Let me say it like that.
Okay. So the journey that all of us have to go through is getting brought to that. And that's either something we have to take on ourselves and really take almost like a day zero mindset, a beginner's mindset to these tools, or we've got to get help. Or we've got to get help and get a reverse mentor. I like to refer to these people as reverse mentors. Stanley McChrystal doesn't need a mentor, but he needs a reverse mentor. He needs a professional who is AI native, who can sit by his side and help point him to the tools. And maybe you play that role for him a bit.
I wasn't that smart. There were younger people than me who were much better at that.
I wrote a blog post just this morning. I was sort of thinking about this in the context of a couple of our portfolio companies are a couple thousand employees, multi-billion-dollar valuations, and they started in the pre-AI native days, and they're trying to reconfigure as AI native companies. And I was pushing a couple of my scale CEOs to hire an AI chief of staff. And so I wrote a blog post today on this topic, which is, hey, look, Stanley McChrystal has chiefs of staff all the time. A lot of CEOs have chiefs of staff to help keep them on schedule, to help highlight key issues, to help organize what's falling through the cracks. You all need an AI chief of staff, which is someone who is pushing you to build an AI native culture and to be an AI native leader yourself, because AI native cultures only come from AI native leaders. And so as you all think about in the crowd, where you sit on this scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is an AI newbie and 10 is an absolute AI native superhero, I won't ask for people to score themselves and make it public. I don't want to embarrass anyone. But I would say to you, you really need to push yourself to become an 8, a 9, or a 10 on that scale. And if you're not able to do it yourself with the beginner mindset and with this sort of growth mindset orientation, you also need to get an AI chief of staff or a reverse mentor to help you.
And I think this is so important, again, in terms of how the humans and the technology relate. I name checked. I worked for Stanford for 2 years, and for anyone who's never read the book Team of Teams, I encourage it. It's one of the best leadership books I think that there is. But he talks about being in Iraq in 2004, 2005, 2006, when frankly things were going very badly. And the thing that he came to very quickly is he said, we don't move as fast as our enemy. He said, even if I work these guys, these are Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Army Rangers, even if I work them 24 hours a day, they do not move as fast as the folks were fighting, because he realized really quickly, one, his enemy did not have a centralized organizational chart. There was no leader. Two, they were using technology. At that time, bulletin boards, if folks remember those, to share information. And literally he would say, the folks we were fighting would do things at 9 and change practice by 3, based on what they saw in the field. And he said, because of our traditional org chart, I could never get a decision made faster, literally going from the general down to the field, from the field back to the general in less than 24 hours. I just couldn't do it because of the nature of a normal corporate military organizational org chart. And so as I hear what you're saying about how do we get these 10x benefits of AI, it requires founders to think differently about how they organize themselves. And for example, one of the phrase you'll hear from the general is decisions made at the lowest appropriate level. In most organizations, you run the decision as high as possible, frankly, so that people can cover themselves and make sure that if it goes the wrong way, it wasn't my fault. He said, that can't happen. It's too slow. I don't know what's happening if I'm in the green zone and you're in Anbar province. And then secondly, even if I do make the decision, candidly, the higher up the chart I go, the more abstract I am, frankly, the more conservative I am. Whereas when I read this book and when I've heard what you're talking about, you actually need people running as hard as they can, as fast as they can, seeing problems, and by nature applying AI in a way that probably is too fast to go up to the CEO's office and back down.
I love this framing that you had, because it elevates a tension that exists with this way of doing business. In a startup, you can begin this culture from day zero. And so you can drive that throughout the entire organization and throughout your processes, and your infrastructure can be configured in this very flexible way, guerrilla style, as you hint at. For larger organizations, nonprofits, government entities, it's really hard. You made the comment earlier, Chike, that humans take time to adjust and organizational cultures take time to adjust. And so there is a natural tension, but I would argue it's a healthy tension between pushing that power and control to the front lines and empowering them to create and be builders themselves, not wait for the IT organization to approve a tool, to get on the vendor compliance list and yada, 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 but also to spin up these pilots and experiments in a way that they can scale over time. One of the complaints I hear from a lot of my larger portfolio companies is that they run these experiments and then they struggle to scale them. A complaint I hear from a lot of my software companies is that they sell these pilots and they get very excited about securing a pilot at a Fortune 1000 company, and then they can't get that company to deploy that pilot enterprise-wide. So really being thoughtful about that, what I call sort of the getting out of the pilot ghetto and moving into the mainstream, and what are the milestones, what are the pathways, what's the playbook for doing that. You need to have that language inside your company so that you can encourage those experiments to scale rapidly.
When I was in government, we call that death by pilot. But basically, saying you would do a pilot was a way to say no without saying no. And so Mitchell Weiss, who is one of your colleagues, talks about this, at least in a government context, which is when you decide to do a pilot, you have to have a scale plan come with it. Meaning, if I see X from this pilot within 6 months, I've already seconded resources so that we can go to whatever that next scale is, instead of it being, again, a way to say no without saying no. Let's pivot a little bit. One thing that I love that you talk about in this book a lot is effectively this application of the scientific method to the business of entrepreneurship, the business of startups. And in many ways, we've talked about this a little bit in Silicon Valley. I think about the lean startup model, obviously from Eric Ries. This seems to take this a step further. Talk about, just at a high level, why this approach? And then secondly, you talk about 3 different types of experiments that folks should be running. Talk about them and where they apply and how.
It's one of the reasons I asked Eric Ries to be an endorser of the book, is that in many ways, I think the lean startup was a pivot point to get entrepreneurs to think about experimentation and lean methodology. When he wrote it 15 years ago, pre AI. Now we're in the age of AI, and you've got these incredible tools at your disposal to run these experiments faster than ever, to run more experiments faster than ever. But again, humans are the bottleneck. And so you really have to be strategic about the way you choose what experiments to run, in what sequence, and what the results are that you hope to see in order to think about that scaling property. I think in the book, I have this quote. I don't know, how many people here have read the book Zen? This is an obscure book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Okay, pretty good. Larry, we've got some bookworms in the house, as I would expect at an author's event. So Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert Pirsig is the author. I think it was written in the 1970s, maybe 60s, and it involves a very deep philosophical look into the mind of a schizophrenic. It's a wild book. There's a quote in the book that I love where it describes the scientific method as having a ceiling, because you can run any experiment you want. And in the age of AI, you literally can run any experiment you want. But where does human judgment come in? Where does the strategic thinking come in to decide what's the experiment that will drive the most value? In the world of startups, I refer to it as the unlock that valuation inflection point. And so what I really push entrepreneurs to do, and this is why I have this phrase, timeless methods, timely tools, is to really think strategically and apply their human judgment and taste and discernment to experimentation, selection, and sequencing that will unlock the business model, and then leverage the modern AI tools to execute those experiments rapidly and efficiently. And that's really the power combination. When we internally as investors are evaluating teams that we're considering investing in, we ask ourselves, how strong are they on the AI native 1 to 10 scale? And do they have what we call earned secret, this strategic insight and discernment about where the future is heading, and maybe unlocking something that no one else can see about their market and where it's going, to apply these incredible tools to this business opportunity?
So first on the last thing you said, that strategic insight, I advise 2 funds in Maryland, and one of the partners there, he asks a question always that I love, which is, and this is to prospective founders, he'll ask, what is the thing that you believe that makes other people think that you're crazy? Because it says 2 things. One, it identifies what that strategic insight is, and ideally, it's a strategic insight that's so counterintuitive that other people haven't followed it yet, so you won't have those fast followers, meaning you'll capture more of the rents.
If I can say a comment on that, there's a hedge fund investor named Howard Marks. Some of you may have heard of him or read his incredible letters. He has this phrase, which is a terrific phrase, which is you can't just be right or wrong. The 2x2 matrix is right or wrong, and then obvious or non-obvious. So you've got to be right and non-obvious. That strategic insight has to be a little bit crazy, a little bit where people, kind of kick back. I have a friend who's a Midas list investor in India who likes to say, when he tells his partners about his next new investment, if they don't kind of jump back a little bit and their eyes don't pop open, he's got the wrong deal. He really wants to shock them a little bit with how outrageous and non-obvious the opportunities are that he's thinking about.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I didn't quite think about. So we'll come back to startups, but I want to come to your profession for a second.
Which one?
Actually, we'll talk about both. We will talk about both. So let's go to the stat that you talked about. So I want to put AI adoption in perspective. The internet reached 100 million people in 7 years. To put it in perspective, it took electricity 80 years to reach that level of adoption, electricity and telephony. 80 years to 7 years. ChatGPT goes to 100 million users in what, 8 weeks, 9 weeks? Just to put it in perspective, 80 years for electricity, 7 years for the internet, 2 months for AI. So the speed, the compression of the S-curve, as we would call it, is tremendous.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
I think it's really hard for humans to think in exponential terms. And you're hitting on this, Chike, in a very important way. And I just want to comment on it because these models are now recurring. They are self-learning. So the AI is building the AI. What that means is that the models are training themselves in infinite loop. And so you're seeing this improvement hit this exponential curve because it's not just humans that are improving the AI. As I said, it's the tens of thousands of agents that the humans have spun up to work on the AI to improve the AI. As soon as these new capabilities are released, they're available instantly to the 8 billion smartphones in your pocket, instantly to 2 billion laptops, instantly to 1.5 billion
Cost of distribution becomes almost zero.
cars. The cost of distribution and speed of distribution is zero. So you just have to sort of internalize, why is it that the adoption is so fast, and why will it even accelerate in the next year or two or three? It's because the AI is in a self-learning loop right now, which has never happened before in history.
Correct.
And the endpoints are infinite and immediately available to you at no cost with no friction. That's why we're in such an extraordinary moment.
So let's talk about two of your professions. I have watched a set of investors talk about, can AI do what I do? Meaning allocate capital. One of them was like, well, candidly, knowing some of the investors that I know, actually, I think the AI would do a better job. And then others who are like, no, there is in some ways, being an investor is almost the most affective type of profession. I need to look a person in the eye and see, particularly at the stage that you're at. Early stage, seed stage, to see if they can do it, because generally they're not right the first time. They've got to figure out, do they have the resilience to do such? Can they lead a team as such? So talk about being an investor for a second. Will AI one day do parts of what you do, or all of what you do?
My opening line in the book is that AI is not going to replace founders anytime soon, but founders who use AI effectively are absolutely going to replace founders who don't. And I think the same is true for every profession, including venture capitalists. We're using AI a ton at our firm at Flybridge. We have an AI chief of staff, the type of profile I mentioned in my blog post this morning. We hired that person about a month ago. So I do think that all of us are going to be using AI to the hilt, not to necessarily, again, replace ourselves, but to empower ourselves and create these superpowers. You know, Larry, who's organized this event, is a lawyer. He's a very good lawyer. There are hundreds of AI for legal startups right now.
Yes.
Hundreds. We've invested in a few. There are just, if I were to show you the chart with all of the logos, it would blow your mind. And yet, many of these companies are going to achieve liftoff. We have a few that are already achieving liftoff, and adoption is going absolutely through the roof, which probably means we've hit peak employment of lawyers in America.
You may have no legal friends after you do this today.
I don't know how this is going to play out.
So let's take your other profession for a second. You are an educator. I started my career. I've taught at the K-12 level. I've done higher ed. I've spent time in the workforce now. This is happening in real time in terms of, what does AI mean in higher education? What does it mean for students? What does it mean for you as educators? How do you see that right now?
So HBS has pretty dramatically re-engineered our curriculum. We teach by the case method, which examines moments in a company's life and puts the student in the shoes of the protagonist, and sort of this famous Socratic method. We don't lecture. We don't try to convey formulas and frameworks in a top-down fashion. We use the case method as a way to bring insights to life. And now what we're doing is we're telling our students, studying the case method isn't good enough. You also have to be hands-on, know the tools. And in fact, we now have a required course in the HBS curriculum on generative AI. It's very rare for a new required course to be created, and we just created it, first one in 30 years. We have a number of courses that are very hands-on, including my course. There's a course about innovation and ideation that Mike Grandetti is helping out in as an executive fellow. Mike is an incredible educator and leader at the intersection of business and technology, and he's pushing the students to become builders, which is what's happening across the school. And they're getting it.
The enthusiasm with which they're embracing is just extraordinary. They know they have to do this, and so they're embracing it.
And so I tell our students, you know, it used to be if you had an idea, you would have to go across the river to MIT and try to find a technical co-founder. You know, now, you know, you're the technical co-founder in one. You've got to learn to be a builder. And so It's just an extraordinary revolution in how we're thinking about it. When the spreadsheet came out, by the way, the spreadsheet was invented in Boston at Harvard Business School by a guy named Dan Bricklin. And if you don't know this history, it's a great history. He started VisiCalc. He was in the classroom. He saw the HBS professors doing all these rows and columns of numbers and calculating them up by hand. And Dan, in the late 1970s, said, "Well, I'm a programmer. I could program that." And he built VisiCalc, which then Lotus 1-2-3 copied, which then Excel copied. Excel 40-year anniversary just passed. 1 billion users of Excel. The only product maybe more popular than Excel is ChatGPT.
That's right.
Or the other way around. Maybe Excel is the only product more popular than ChatGPT. Anyway, my point being that we didn't really emphasize learn the tools. We talked a lot about learn the cases, learn the theory, learn the frameworks, be a leader. And now we're saying yes and learn the tools. Get your hands dirty.
Let me ask a question, and it's pivoting back to kind of startup founders. So one of the things, when I've looked at companies, when I've seen great investors look at companies, the question is always asked, okay, how do I stop someone from doing what you do? It's a classic, if Google decided to do what you do tomorrow, what would happen? The answer is usually I would hopefully sell my company to them, or I just fold. In the age of AI, are there moats?
It's a great question, GK, and we debate this all the time. It's the central question that every venture capitalist struggles with. I saw Daniel walk in. I'm going to cold call Daniel from Visible Hands, which is a great venture capital firm here in the Boston area that Daniel co-founded. Every partners meeting, Daniel, you all talk about this, I'm sure, as well. What do you say are the competitive moats? This is the cold call audience participation portion of our
Daniel, no.
afternoon session.
There's a TA who's taking notes on your comments right now.
Pass this class.
Mike's gonna grade you.
Well, first, it's great to have Jeff in the room. Jeff, fun fact, Jeff was our first investor. Our first investor. He really believes, and he walks the walk and talks the talk. So thank you, Jeff. Competitive mode. I think actually going to Jeff's book is that I love this idea that if you're not using AI, your competitor is, and your competitor will replace you. So for us, in fact, just how we've been implementing some of these things within our team. I just came off a board call with our leadership. Is that we are moving towards a sophistication era. And the sophistication era is that we need to think about how do we implement and use these tools across every channel of our operations. And if in some places it might be effective, in some places it's probably not, but we at least need to make sure that we're analyzing it so that we can be effective. And then also telling our portfolio companies to do that, right? And how do you establish folks within your operations? And also, if they're doing that, then they're also sharing that with their customers. So that's how we've been going about this.
Yeah, I think it's a great framing, and it sort of links into something also that Chike said about his experience in the military, speed of execution. I don't know if there are great competitive moats in the age of AI. Every time OpenAI holds a developer day, we hold our breath because we think, okay, they just obliterated 10% of the startup ecosystem, including a handful of our portfolio companies with their latest release. And yet, our best entrepreneurs are executing incredibly nimbly, rapidly, with extraordinary velocity. And the word you will hear in our partnership more than ever is less about sustainable competitive advantage and more about execution velocity. That's definitely been a shift in our conversation internally.
When I look at AI companies, this is probably our last one or two questions before we go to the audience. I'm excited as someone who's been across the nonprofit space, the public sector, as well as the private sector. It seems that the outsized rewards are people going into the hardest spaces. So I think about, you're probably familiar with Lila Sciences, where my old boss in the McChrystal Group now is their president of operations. So for those of you who don't know Lila Sciences, they are seeking to create scientific superintelligence. They are seeking to have AI learn how to do the scientific method. I believe their first lab is in Kendall Square, if I remember correctly.
So George Church, one of the co-founders, who's bringing the woolly mammoth back to life.
Correct.
If you've paid attention to his work, $200 million raised. This is at the heart of recursive AI. It's AI, learning AI to be brilliant at scientific discovery in biology and chemistry, so that you can load up your particular genome and have a customized therapeutic for you, and every single detail of your genome factored into that customized therapeutic. And then this recursive learning as we have this the human population sort of permeate. It's an incredible idea behind the company.
So I just have this belief. I think about a few companies are doing this in the exascale manufacturing space, trying to figure out how do we dramatically increase the American industrial base, and that generally venture capital would never have stepped near 10 years ago. But now with the application of AI, potentially there is room. Step back for me for a second. I was literally just watching. Who was I watching? It was Crusoe Energy, which is one of these companies really seeking to deal with. Talk about the potential limiting factors. So when we talk about AI, what are the things people are concerned about? Availability of compute, which is directly tied to the availability of energy. Also in certain parts of the country, there's also availability of water. So talk about some of the macro inputs, but also potential risks that might slow the development of AI, which if you're a startup, you have to think about this. Where will my compute come from? How is it powered? So on and so forth. Talk about how you think about that in terms of what you do every day.
So, as you said, compute and energy are the two biggest limiters. There are so many brilliant people tackling both of those areas. And when you read about these extraordinary financings and deals between OpenAI and NVIDIA, OpenAI and AMD, Broadcom and Google with their TPU structure, their tensor processing units, you get this appreciation that there's $1 trillion of capital flowing into this. And I have a lot of confidence that compute is going to be solved because of that. We have a few companies that are doing amazing things around speeding up compute and deconstructing software accelerations to chipsets. And at the same time, on the energy front, here in Boston, Commonwealth Fusion is one of the most extraordinary companies in history, out of MIT, $3 billion plowed into this incredible fusion energy source. There's nuclear energy being generated and huge amounts of capital now going into nuclear power plants, small nuclear power plants to fuel the chipsets and the server racks. So I sort of step back and I think on the macro level, the most brilliant minds in the world with the most extraordinary capital in the world is tackling those problems. They're going to be solved. Like you can just see the techno-economic curve working its way down. So on a day-to-day basis, I actually have an abundance mindset, which is this stuff's going to work. And I have to invest today in companies where I'm thinking about 2035 to 2040 timeframes. And in those timeframes, we're going to have AI superintelligence, we're going to have infinite energy, and we're going to have infinite compute. And I just have to sort of believe that in the context of the investments I make today.
Questions? So we are going to we're going to start here. We're going to work our way over. So starting off here.
Just want to double click on the AI chief of staff. It's got the two parts. Just hire this person a month ago at the end of their first performance period. What will they have to accomplish to say that this was a hire? And then the second part is, will you make this person available to your portfolio companies that are maybe not quite good for the short term?
Well, other people who might need one, like
I just want to give you a little bit of the profile of this individual, and then I'll answer your question. So he was a Northeastern undergrad engineering student and a master's of engineering computer science student at Northeastern. He was only a year or two out. He had worked at a startup and he had worked in a support role at another venture capital firm. And he had started his own podcast on being a young professional in venture capital. And he reached out to my partner in New York to interview him for his podcast. And he reached out to one of my other colleagues to interview her for his podcast. And so it was sort of a really interesting profile of an individual who's a builder, passionate about the field, and had the chutzpah and the proactivity to kind of build this network and build this community. So we saw the evidence of his work. Because to start a podcast while you're a professional, while you're a builder, it's unbelievable. Then in the interview process, we would say, boy, it would really be great to have this tool. I'm really struggling with this problem with communicating with my LPs, my investors. Daniel has this problem as well. On the receiving end, I can tell him, I'm just kidding. No, Daniel's great at this. We're not as great. And so, right after that interview, he built a tool and replit in like a day and showed it to us and said, hey, would this be something you'd be, useful? And we're like, wow. And then he built something in Airtable and said, hey, is this something that would be useful? We said, wow. So he was a builder. And he asked us this question when he joined us, when we eventually decided to hire him. And he said, what will be successful? And our response was, keep building tools that we say wow to, and that makes us 10x professionals, that we can focus our energy on working with founders and doing things that AI can't do, like sit in board meetings and help coach them on recruiting and strategy, and take care of some of the administrative and operational work that are involved in running an investment firm.
So, right here.
You brought up that maybe 10 years ago, you could start pitching manufacturing, but bringing AI into it might be changing that. I'd love to hear Jeff's perspective, because at Fusion, we are the advanced manufacturing company with the goal of bringing AI and machine learning to increase machine optimization, scale up productivity, with the long-term goal of bringing companies like Commonwealth Fusion the ability to get parts in one place to bring fusion solutions. So kind of a big goal, but what's been interesting is sometimes some people say they have a little AI fatigue or look at your software. Where do you see this kind of AI
with hardware in the real in the physical world? Yeah, I see two approaches to this problem. Approach number one is be a software provider for the manufacturing and industrial world. We have a portfolio company at Greentown Labs. It used to be called H2OK Innovations. Yeah. They changed their name to Laminar, and they're a fluid precision fluids company. So they put a little sensor into the pipes of a Anheuser-Busch or Ben and Jerry's to make sure the quality of the milk is precise, so that when you get that pint of Ben and Jerry's, my favorite flavor is mint cookie. When you get that pint of Ben and Jerry's, that the quality is really on point, because if the quality were to go off by a little bit, they have to shut down the whole line, and it's incredibly costly. So that's a company that's trying to get major CPGs, major consumer packaged goods companies, to adopt AI in their infrastructure. Turns out there's a lot of friction involved in that. So approach number one, try to help these laggard industrial companies embrace AI faster. Approach number two is go buy the manufacturing plants yourself and retrofit them from scratch to be fully robotic, fully automated, fully AI native. And we just recently invested in a company doing that, a team out of Tesla and Rivian. And more you're seeing this sort of attitude of, well, if accounting firms won't buy AI software, let's just start an AI native accounting firm. And if law firms won't adopt AI software fast enough, let's just buy and start a law firm that's going to be an AI native law firm. So a lot of companies are really thinking about this sort of AI native services model or AI native manufacturing model, or be a software provider and try to find a way to, use that wedge to get people to adopt your stuff sooner.
It's good to hear all this.
All right. Cool. Right.
Kind of another macro question for you. You've touched upon some social benefits potentially coming from AI, certainly health and environment being something. For my take, it seems to have a lot of potential to speed up the wealth inequality that's been growing. And do you see it that way? Do you see things we can do to make that not be the direction?
I do. You're touching on a really profound question. And Chike mentioned that he's a fellow at Harvard's Future of Work with Joe Fuller, my colleague at HBS. And Joe and I were having a kind of a side conversation on this point the other day over coffee, where we were debating what would be the unemployment rate in 2 or 3 years in the US. And I'm just curious what people in this room think. So today it's 3 or 4% unemployment. How many of you think it'll be rise up to 6%? Okay, keep your hand up. How many people think it'll rise up to 8%? How many people think it'll rise up to 10%? Okay, now everyone's hand down. How many people think it'll rise above 10%? Yeah, our number was 10%. It's pretty dramatic. If you can imagine 2 or 3 years from now, we'll have 10% unemployment. I don't know if that's right. That's just my instinct. Joe's instinct is the same. Right now, underemployment amongst, I'm going to quote a bunch of things that Chike is working on. I don't want to steal your thunder, but underemployment among youth is in the 50% range right now. And I believe unemployment among youth is about 12%, something like this. I mean, the number, the canary in the coal mine is junior professionals the jobs are evaporating for junior professionals, and it's rippling through the economy. And as you pointed out, income inequality and wealth inequality is rising. NVIDIA yesterday hit $5 trillion of market cap. That's an extraordinary value creation event for the people around NVIDIA. And we now have 8 or 10 companies north of $1 trillion of market cap. And we have dozens of companies north of 500 billion. And we have thousands of companies north of 1 billion. I mean, the numbers are staggering. And yet we are seeing an affordability crisis in housing and healthcare and education throughout the country. So it's really a huge issue. It's something I think our policymakers are not really grasping, and I could go into more detail as to why that might be, but it really is there's a reckoning coming, and I'm not sure how that's going to play out.
Just on this point, because I spent a lot of my time thinking about it, a couple kind of stats and that further bear the point. So historically, if you were a college graduate, the highest unemployment you would see is, I want to say it's 4%. Generally, it's not going above that. Today, for a new college graduate, that unemployment rate, which doesn't sound high, is 6.6%, which doesn't sound high, but compared to what we have seen, this is an economic event. I'll use a very local event. I'm from the state of Maryland. One of our biggest industries is cybersecurity, because Fort Meade, which is where the National Security Agency is based, is literally a half hour up the road from me. Historically, even 5 years ago, if a young student got any type of certification or degree around cybersecurity, they were hired before they walked out of the door of their university. Today, an entry-level cybersecurity job requires 3 to 5 years of experience, which doesn't seem to intuitively make sense. But when you talk to companies, they say, well, candidly, I'm using AI to do what a 22-year-old would have done. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, how do you square that circle? For us in Maryland, we're trying to figure this out too. Well, the only way you square this circle is I have to get them experience before they walk out the door. Therefore, their degree must be much more applied. They have to be doing actual work with actual companies so that when they apply, I can effectively say they have that experience. So let me ask you one last question. And Jeff will be around to sign books very shortly, and we will have a reception. There's someone in this room thinking about starting a company. I don't know who they are, but someone in here is thinking about it. Let's assume they have not read this book. Let's assume that they've just heard you for the first time. What would you tell them about everything that you've learned that they should apply to the company that they're going to start?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple, which is just be a total 10 out of 10 AI native professional and take this orientation of focusing on being a builder. A lot of professionals that I see, and this may be a Harvard MBA phenomenon, are very focused on pitching and fundraising versus building. And that's a huge red flag for us. We want to see evidence of builders. And the evidence is not what you say, and it's not in the slide deck, it's in what you build. So be AI native, be a builder.
So all that time in PowerPoint was not as time well spent back in my consultant days. Give a great hand to Jeff, please.